Hey everyone, welcome to the Not a Lonely Coffee Break podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Meaghan. We're a podcast about coffee and work, but make it queer.
Speaking of queer, um, I
Speaking of,
speaking of our favorite topic, I participated in something really cool recently. I think the past few episodes we've been talking a little bit about just like finding joy.
right.
But I went and participated in the Queer and Trans Liberation March
That's
that took
awesome.
place in Dallas. Um, it was my first time ever going to a march. I know that might surprise people, but I don't like a lot of crowds.
Yeah,
I will support people who go and do things like that. I just have never really been one to go on marches or anything like that.
hmm
But I don't know, a lot is going on and I just felt like it was important. It was too important to skip.
right.
So we decided very last minute to go, like literally an hour before.
You're like, and we're on our way.
Yeah, that's kind of what happened. Just because we have a lot going on, we're super busy, super swamped,
hmm
and so it was kind of like, do we want to take a nap or do we want to go and exercise our right to protest? both
Well, I'm
both
proud of
would
you.
bring me joy, but was a great turnout. There was a lot of people there,
Good.
which was sort of the first encouraging thing because even as we were sort of walking up to the starting point, I was kind of saying, oh, I hope it's a good turnout. It was a good amount of people. I don't know the exact number. It definitely could have been more. Don't get me wrong. It was also it was like a 2 mile walk, I think. So we weren't like exhausted at the end of the walk.
Right.
There were lots of people there that are friends of the show. So
That's awesome.
it was cool bumping into friends of the show and people that should be friends of the show
And future friends of the show.
and future friends of the show. But yeah, it was just really cool seeing the allies and people from the queer community just come together to say that we are not okay with everything that's going on. So yeah, it was a really cool, surprisingly uplifting opportunity. I did have, some nervousness
Yeah, I'm
throughout.
sure.
Not I never really felt unsafe, which was something I was fearful of
Right.
initially because you never know.
You never know.
But it does seem like it was pretty well organized to make sure that everyone felt safe. The only
Good.
thing that I sort of had some like about were how many people there were that were like randomly taking pictures that weren't clearly identified with media or anything like that. They would just like randomly go and take people's pictures. And so part of me was kind of like, I don't know who you are.
Yeah,
What are your intentions with this photo?
right.
So just throughout the day, I did find myself occasionally like I'd see someone with a camera and I'd go with my little poster, like cover it.
No
And
pictures, please.
that was kind of surprising that I felt that way just because like, I don't I don't really care. Like we have this podcast. If
Yeah.
they really want to find me, they can find me. I think it was just kind of like
Like,
that
if
was
it
really
is
the
this a
only
personal picture? Is this a professional
right.
picture?
Right. I guess it was like that consent piece.
Right, right.
But I wasn't so bothered by it that I needed to like I was just mindful, I think, of all the
Mhm,
cameras is
mhm.
really what it was.
I mean, sometimes people do cover their faces at protests for specific
Yeah.
reasons, you know?
And I think if we had planned a little bit more, we probably would have like made sure we had bandanas or something to cover our face a little bit more. There were some people that you could tell they were very intentional about making sure that their faces
Right.
were covered. And that was just sort of my one regret was that we didn't plan accordingly
Mhm.
to have something like that just to protect our identities a little bit
Yeah.
more.
Well, now you know. And, with everything that's going on, the censorship and all, like, obviously, if you're working for the federal government or the military, like, you literally can't speak out against the
Right.
administration. So, I mean, I could see why protecting your identity is pretty,
Right.
is not out of the ordinary. I mean, but no, I'm glad you had a good time. I'm glad everyone was safe. Like you said, you never know. I wish I could be there for the next one, maybe.
The next one. I
For the
think
next one.
I think this was maybe, I don't know, it felt like it was kind of a trial run.
Yeah.
So
I'm
I
sure
think
there will
that
be more. Yeah.
I think we'll see some more opportunities in the future.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And maybe we can prepare with signs and stuff.
Mhm.
Did they
Mhm.
supply you with signs? Like, were there
They
organizations that did
it's
everything?
so they did have the night before, they did have like a sign making party at Sue Ellen's,
Oh, okay.
but obviously we missed that. But there
Hmm.
was this person there that, early on when, people were speaking and before we took off, he was literally walking around and he had made like a decent amount of signs and
Oh,
he was
wow.
just handing them out to people.
That's cool.
So yeah, we did get some signs that said fantastic things. It said, "Don't like gay marriage, don't get gay married." And on the back it said, "Don't like trans people, don't transition."
Yeah. Hmm. That's actually some
Yeah.
really good advice.
I was also very impressed by there were a few individuals that chose to do the walk in drag.
Hmm.
And Megan, when I tell you that their heels were like the size of me, I am not. I was like, how are they walking in this
I don't I don't know.
on the street? And like, they didn't once look like they were struggling, in
Hey.
pain,
Yeah.
anything.
I have to say it's quite a talent and, dedication because I don't know. It
No.
hurts. So good for them. That's awesome.
Mhm.
First off, because I mean, it's a lot to get into drag and then it's a lot to do it walking 2 miles.
Oh my gosh,
So that's
yeah.
awesome. That is so
Yeah.
cool.
It was fun. It was fun. You'll have to join us the next one.
Yes, I will, for
We
sure.
won't decide last minute.
There's so much out there that is deterring us from exercising our freedom of speech and
Mm.
trying to make us second guess what our rights really are and what that means
Mhm.
to queer folks and to a
Yeah.
lot of groups of people. And so I think getting more active and showing that, like, hey, like all you're doing is definitely not being ignored. We're pissed and
Mhm.
we're not going to let it go. So we got to keep
Mhm.
fighting for it for sure.
No, I think so. And like every every little thing that you feel comfortable doing can make a difference. I know sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but um I don't know. I think that attending this rally just really helped kind of ignite that a little bit more in me because I
Hmm.
was feeling a little bit down, like, oh, what's the point?
Yeah.
And so this kind of recharged that battery a little bit.
Right. Well, that's awesome. Well, with that being said, like, you and I have been discussing a lot the last few episodes about like a lot of the changes, things that have happened politically, the censorship, the literal stripping of rights
Hmm.
from queer folks, from trans people, um, from people of color. It's
From
little by little, we just feel
veterans.
like veterans. Yeah.
Yes.
And the workforce. I mean, like I said earlier,
Hmm.
the federal workforce, the military are definitely trying to stem off any sort of dissent within the workplace. Obviously, they can't post on social media, they can't discuss it with each other. Um, they can't discuss it while they're at work. Like anything political that
Hmm.
is negative against the administration, you can definitely lose your job. Or if you're in the military, I mean, I'm not sure if it could lead to a dishonorable discharge, but they can probably make your life pretty miserable. Um, Taking away pay, probably messing with your rank, um, getting rid of any sort of access to benefits.
Hmm.
So it's pretty scary. So I was, thinking that maybe we should talk about some of the political advocates in our history that fought for queer
Yeah.
rights.
And I think, when you and I were talking about this, I think it's so important because another thing that was coming up kind of at this march where a lot of people were saying things like, I can't believe we're having to do this again. I thought we were done with this. And it just kind of made me even think about like some of those people who were part of the early gay rights movements and activists, how disheartening for them. If they're still living with us, if they're still part of us, how disheartening for them to see that like all that progress that we had made is now in some cases worse.
Yeah, just getting stripped away at this
But yeah,
point or
so I was
silenced.
really so yeah, I was really excited. So Meaghan, do you want to tell us which pioneer, which activist we picked to talk about in today's episode?
So we decided to move forward with Dr. Frank Kameny. Definitely kind of brought my attention due to his advocacy work and obviously in the queer space, but also directly with the workforce due to the discrimination he faced.
I thought he was very interesting as well, and he definitely went through a lot. So he was a World War II veteran, and he enlisted in the army pretty early. Um, and he was interested in this sort of army specialized program that would allow enlisted soldiers to take college courses that were kind of like STEM oriented. I don't know. To me, it kind of seems like they had the ability to go and they were learning like a trade that would be beneficial to their service in the army. But then World War II had different plans for everyone. And so he got pushed more to the front lines where he wasn't really able to participate in that specialized program because he had to fight in the war. And then once the war was over, he was discharged and he wanted to continue his studies. He was able to use his GI benefits to attend college where he was able to explore more of the sciencey things that he was interested in.
So he ended up, yeah, getting astronomy was his field of choice. Definitely wanted to do from the beginning, but he just kind of took off with it, which is awesome. But as he got into his career, he was arrested. He was arrested for being at a clubs back in the day when there was the lavender scare. So basically there was a lot of fear that the gay population, homosexuals as they would use the term then, were like a national security threat. They were going to dismantle. Of course, there was also the red scare, so a lot of communist discussion was being used at the time to just blacklist people and to single them out in communities and basically dismantle their entire lives.
Yeah.
So specifically, a lot of gay bars were targeted because they knew, okay, well, if they're going to be here, or even they wouldn't even be gay bars at the time. They were like underground nightclubs, right? And so people would gather and they would wait for them to be in a situation where they were like being together sexually, or just having physical acts of, either you were gay or lesbian, and then they would use that against you to arrest you. So that did happen to him.
But it was also kind of like I think what stood out to me was and you said this, Meaghan, it took like during sort of that McCarthy
Mhm.
where everyone was like obsessed with talking about communism and the Soviet Union. Like this was also happening. They were also targeting other people. So like even if someone wasn't necessarily gay and someone reported them for any kind of behavior that they deemed as potential homosexual, they could have them arrested. And so yes, it was obviously targeting gay people, but there were also people who were not gay who were
Mhm.
being accused and their lives were changing because they had charges for
Right.
lewd conduct.
Mhm.
It was
There
very
really
eerie.
Yeah, and then there wasn't really a lot of protection back then. So it's like if you got charged with it, especially if you couldn't afford a lawyer, or maybe you just didn't want to deal with the publicity of getting those taken care of, then you would just deal with it,
Mhm.
and deal with the charge and pay for it, or whatever time spent for it. But it would definitely disrupt like people's way of life and people's lives altogether. And in some ways, it outed a lot of people,
Yeah.
and um, this was probably the only private part of their lives. So, with that being said, he was charged, detained, and accused of, they say, lewd or indecent acts,
Mhm.
which he ended up pleading guilty, accepting the fine and then some probation.
Mhm.
And then he furthered his career, and went to Georgetown University, where he was actually hired by the U.S. Army again. So he continued his career regardless in the U.S.
Mhm.
military, which is,
Yeah, so he was arrested in 1956,
uh huh.
but then he was hired because the army brought him in to help kind of make maps, like like science-y maps. What is it? Astronomical.
Oh, maybe, yeah, maybe actual.
So that was in July of 1957 when he
Mhm.
started working with them, creating these maps. And he was like getting to do everything that he loved to do. Um, which was also really important because a big thing that was happening at this time was the Soviet Union launched Sputnik. Right, it kickstarted the what do we call it? The Cold War,
Mhm.
when it's kind of like the battle to see who's gonna go to space. So that was sort of what prompted them to really start exploring, okay, we need astronomers, we need people to help us beat the Soviet Union in all of this. So in July of 1957, they bring him in, he's making his maps, minding his own business, enjoying life. And then in October of the same year, um his I guess the higher ups received information um about his prior arrest and what it was for. And so they bring him in. He was actually I actually in our research of this, I actually saw he was actually on a business trip,
Oh, wow.
and they brought him back so that they could question him about these charges,
Mhm.
because they had seen that he had pled guilty to the lewd conduct with another man, and they were asking him if he was in fact a homosexual. And he also, at the time, he was closeted. Like, he had his private life, of course, where he was doing whatever he wanted to do, but he was not sort of an openly gay man at this point in time, of course. But once this sort of came about, it forced him out.
Yeah.
And so he then was fired from his job after just working there a short time. He was fired for being gay. They also said, he lied on his initial application, I guess, clearance interviews and whatever, because one of the questions, I guess there were a series of questions about your sexual orientation. And so they said he was sort of misleading in that he told them he was not gay. So they fired him for lying. They fired him for being gay. And that also means that he lost his security clearance,
Mhm.
which would really impact his ability to work in any future kind of government jobs. Dun dun dun.
What does he do now? Well, yeah. at this point, I mean, a lot of people, I mean, I myself would be like, well, I guess I'm screwed. But fortunately, he is very strong-minded and a bright
Yeah.
man, and he refused to give in. You
Mhm.
know, he was obviously not the only person, but he was determined to get out and protest the discrimination he faced and other gay men faced. He did get coined the father of the gay rights movement, in which in 1959 he ended up filing a lawsuit against the Secretary of the Army for wrongful termination. It was unsuccessful,
Mhm.
um, but nonetheless,
He
he
did
did
not
it.
give up.
He didn't give up. And then he just kept going.
Mhm. No,
He
yeah,
just
he
kept going.
continued yeah, he just continued to say, like, "I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with this. I will not take no for an answer." And he joined some other activists kinda in his area, to really start sort of advocating for other people who lost their jobs due to their sexuality. I think it was predominantly men. All the research, at least that I found, doesn't specify that. There were a few mentions that it was gay men, but it was really just gay Americans
Mhm.
who were looking to sort of fight for that discrimination. And he would serve sometimes as like a go between the person and their attorney. He would sometimes speak on their behalf. And him and the group of activists, 1965, he helped organize one of the very first gay rights protests, which was a picket line in front of the White House. This happened 4 years before the Stonewall
Oh, really?
riot. Yeah.
Wow.
Um, and that sort of also was during the time that he was filing lawsuits on behalf of other workers. He did eventually win two decisions that would force the government to change its hiring policies. They actually did organize the first in 1970, so it was a while later, but they did actually organize the first Pride Parade in New York.
That's pretty awesome.
Which is like what? He was instrumental in a lot of policy changes that created safer workplaces.
Yeah.
The one that I don't know, Megan, as someone who works in mental health and likes to talk about mental health nonstop, I was I was really excited to see sort of one of the big areas that he was part of, and I knew about it, but I didn't know all the movers in this thing. So back in the day, homosexuality actually was considered a mental illness. And it was actually it was officially in the DSM as well as other diagnostic tools that counselors, psychiatrists, all of those people would use. And so um, oftentimes it would help employers fire people or treat workers differently due to their sexual orientation because they could say it was a mental illness. And even in mental illness, there's been a lot of discrimination and people can lose their jobs still to this day
Mhm.
because of mental illness. But one thing that Dr. Frank, I feel like I know him, that Dr. Frank did with some other activists was they really put pressure on the American Psychiatric Association to change their position on homosexuality. And so, it didn't just happen overnight,
Right.
but in 1973, the association did reverse their stance on it, and so they said that no, it is not a mental illness, and it's no longer um, in that category. Starting in 1973, you couldn't say homosexuality was a mental illness.
Mhm.
Um, and so now that also makes it illegal to deny employment to gay men and women because of mental illness defined by their sexuality. And then 2 years after this, they also saw the U.S. Civil Service Commission reverse its policy for refusing to hire homosexuals. And a lot of that kind of was so when the American Psychiatric Association changed their stance, it was sort of the catalyst for other organizations to
Mhm.
change their stance
Institutions.
as well.
Yeah.
And so that was one that I got really excited about because I was like, oh, that's like my space.
Yeah. It just played such a pivotal role, right? Is like at a time when our world was changing drastically,
Mhm.
industrialization, the use of science and technology. And finally, we have someone, a man of science, like a
Yeah.
researcher, um, who has been discriminated upon and was able to use
Mhm.
like this knowledge and that trade to say, hey, like we got to take away like these biases
Mhm.
that aren't backed by anything other than by fear and hatred, and show that we are just normal people.
Mhm.
And no, uh, I can't imagine where we would be if we didn't have him. Right?
I
Maybe
know,
if it could have been,
right?
I mean, hopefully we still would have gotten there, but I mean, these people are pivotal in
Right.
getting where we need to be.
Yeah, and huge changes.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, he was put on a draft board to repeal the don't ask, don't tell within the military for forever. Um, Basically, if you're gay, that as long as you didn't say anything about it, as
Mhm.
long as you didn't make it public, as long as nobody found out, then you were safe, right? It didn't mean that gay people didn't exist in the military, but for forever, like people had to live in silence for
Right.
their entire careers.
It was kind of like we're just not going to talk about it.
We're just not going to talk about it.
Keep it
We
to
all know it's here.
yourself and
Yeah.
we won't have a problem.
Yeah. Well, and there's in the law within the military, I'm blinking out as far as what it's called, but basically they have laws within the military. They have their own code of conduct and things like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like things like, so they call it sodomy, right? So if you're giving oral to another male or to female with female, like that is like you are going, like they could literally strip you of your rank and kick you out if
Mhm.
someone is
Mhm.
to, and that is
Mhm.
still today there, right?
Yeah.
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 So a lot of people, I'm sure, lived in fear because they literally dedicate their lives serving in public service only to be cornered out and stripped of everything that they worked for. Like I said, he was really pivotal in all the action. And in September 2010, President Barack Obama repealed it, the don't ask, don't tell. And that was kind of the nice cherry on the cake.
Mhm.
One of the
Yeah,
last things that he did.
he got to see it signed. He'd been
Yeah,
sort of advocating for it and pushing for it. And then how special for him to get to see President Obama sign the order that said we're repealing it.
right. Sadly, he did pass away a year later. We have so much to thank him for. The guy was an astronomer.
Mhm.
And he ended up becoming a political advocate, one side of the spectrum to the other. But, you know, part of me is happy that he's not having to see the things get repealed back,
Right.
the freedoms being taken away, even though they are not outwardly saying it towards gay people, towards lesbian, but the trans community is definitely being under open attack,
Yeah.
especially
All that
within the
stuff.
military.
I'm seeing all that stuff online where people are saying they said it out loud. They said the quiet part out loud.
Hmm.
They're openly saying like we want to take your rights away.
Yeah, yeah. And they don't care that you've been serving in the military. Like, these aren't
Yeah.
kids that are serving in the military. Like, these are people
Yeah.
that have careers in the military, that
Mhm.
have worked every inch of their body done deployments, led people, are cherished by a lot of their service members.
Yeah.
I am curious, with all this, looking into what do you call him, Dr. Frank's career and everything he did. I wish I could like just have an interview with him and be like, what should be the next step?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
where do we go from here?
Right.
Because these leaders had such bright and bold ideas that got us to where we were.
Well, and how do you take that negative experience and turn it into almost like a new passion, right? Like he goes from being a closeted gay man who just wants to live his best life and study the stars
Yeah.
and send America to space
Make maps.
to make maps of stars, mind his own business, to being questioned by his employers about his sexual orientation and then losing not just his job but his career as a scientist, and like that's tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
can't imagine.
how did
I know. Give me that
especially
energy.
especially during that time, I mean,
And to
like,
keep going.
yeah, like he just kept going,
Just kept going. I need
kept
that.
going, kept going. But yeah, I think one thing that, as I was learning a little bit more about him and reading just different things, I just was so taken in by his story about, like, oh my gosh, this you could replace all the years from the 1950s to now,
Hmm.
and this is our story.
Yeah.
um and so I was just blown away by it all, and the fact that now we're back to seeing where employers can call you into their office one day and say, are you gay?
Right.
Do you have homosexual tendencies?
Hmm.
Are you a pervert? Some of the accounts I read of sort of him describing that day did say they did call him a pervert
Yeah.
and other terrible things, and he actually just it says that he just sat silent. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no, he just didn't answer. And then they,
Which
of course,
honestly, it was probably the best move. By the way, you don't have to answer their questions.
yeah. And then, of course, they presented their evidence that they had,
Hmm.
to him, and then fired him.
Yeah. And I think that brings up a good point. Like, for anyone listening now, like, know your rights. If you get apprehended, if you're being accused of anything, don't say anything. Get a lawyer. They're going to tell you, hey, work with us, blah, blah, blah. They're just trying to get you to talk, to get you to say something that can be misconstrued. Get a lawyer. There's ACLU. They have chapters everywhere. There's plenty of lawyers in Texas that would represent you.
Yeah, we also have Lambda Legal.
Lambda legal.
They can also help anyone who is perhaps experiencing discrimination.
Yeah. So just remember there's people out there that are willing to protect you, and you don't have to answer questions under pressure, and I highly recommend that you don't without a lawyer. So yes, thank you, Dr. Frank Kameny.
He was a good. I'm glad we picked him to do first.
Yeah, me too.
The father of the gay rights movement.
Now we need to find the mother of the gay rights movement.
Mother,
To be continued.
I think it's Madonna.
I mean, well, let's do a little research. We will definitely be continuing our little series of advocates within the queer space who have advocated for workplace rights. And, there's a lot of wins and there's a lot of losses. But I think the biggest thing is that there was a lot of change that came with it.
That was fun.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to learning more about the queer workers' rights movement and some of the some of the people that were instrumental. Oh my gosh, Megan, one
What?
day will some queers on a podcast be talking about us
That
as
would be
being
crazy sauce.
instrumental?
I don't know how I feel about that. Please don't use any clips.
Clearly, Megan and I think very highly of ourselves and our
Yeah,
show.
I mean, obviously, I think we're gonna keep working regardless if we get the attention or not. So
Of course. We're going to keep talking about
we're
it.
gonna keep talking about it. We're gonna keep working towards it because they really can't stop me. So thank you guys for listening.
Yeah, we are out of coffee, which is
Yeah,
probably a good thing. I don't think we
yeah, it's
need any
probably
more
best.
today.
I think that's best.
We're probably a little hyped. But always, you guys, thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. Make sure that you are subscribed to the show and you have shared it with others because we're always looking to welcome new folks to our community of avid coffee drinkers.
Join us on social media. You can do Instagram. We have LinkedIn, YouTube, like and subscribe. We also have a Patreon. Join us with the Coffee Break crew. And then Threads. We will be at Dallas Pride this year. So please mark your calendars. Weekend of the 14th, June 14th, 2025. We'll have goodies, laughs, smiles. Come
Mhm.
see us. We'd love to have
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. Again, this is Not a Lonely Coffee Break. We're your hosts. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Meaghan.
Cheers,
Cheers,
queer.
queers.